This video will show you the complete guide on how to extrude along a curve using Maya. This is a great modeling technique to use for when you need more organic shapes and surfaces coming out of your objects. They need to curve, they need to reshape, perfect for ropes, wires, tentacles, cables, and so much more. We started off with the most basic way of extruding along a curve, and then we go into more complex usage of this technique, some common problems you encounter, such as getting the direction of the curve wrong and how to fix it, and few tricks that I haven't seen being shared. So you're going to learn everything you need for how to extrude along the curve for Maya modeling. So let's get into it. Now, before we get started, very quickly, I want to mention that if you want to learn Maya completely from scratch, so you can begin modeling your own environments, props, assets, and UV those assets without any prior 3D modeling or UV knowledge or ever touching Maya before, then I recommend you download the only course you will ever need as a complete beginner, Maya Foundation tutorial course. It will teach you everything you need to know about Maya, how to get started, how to model, and how to UV. You can download it by clicking on the link in the description box, or if you are on the worldofleveldesign.com watching this there, then there'll be a link there as well. Now let's continue with the tutorial. Let me show you the basics first. You need a curve, and then you need a set of faces so you can extrude those faces along the created curve. So let's create our first curve. To create curves, you go to Create, Curve Tools, and let me break this menu off as a floating menu. And you have a set of curves you can use. The one that I like to use is EP curve. Another common one is CV curve. Essentially, it doesn't matter which one you use. They both create the same curve. And actually, all of these create the same type of curve in the end. The result is identical. However, how you create those curves differs, and the control points on them are also different. So all these different curves comes down to the control points they use to control them and how you create them to begin with. So I like using EP curve. This is the simplest one to use, very easy to control, and gives you everything you need in order to extrude along this curve. So that's the one I'm going to use. I'm going to go ahead and activate it. And when you draw a curve, it will be drawn on top of the grid. So if you are inside the perspective viewport, you will be drawing the curve on top of the flat grid that you see in the perspective viewport. If you switch over to an orthographic viewport, it will be drawn on top of that grid. But once you've drawn the curve, you'll be able to modify it afterwards. So let's just go ahead and draw it inside the perspective viewport. So I'm going to left click once. It begins to place a point. I'm going to left click again. That's your second point. Left click one more time. And then you have a curve. 3 points create a curve. You can continue with additional points if you want for a longer curve, but 3 is required for you to create that curve. So let's just draw one over here. So I have 5 points placed. I can continue, but I'll be done with this. To create a curve, just hit enter. And now you have a curve. Again, it's flat on top of the grid. And the pivot point will be in world origin. Let me go ahead and create another curve just to show you. If I create another curve in, let's say, side view, and I'm just going to draw it off away somewhere. So here's another curve. So here, this curve was created in side view, as you can see right here, and the pivot point is in world origin. By selecting a curve and then right click hold, you're able to switch over to a component mode for that curve. So if we want to modify the curve afterwards, go ahead and select control vertices. That will give you ability to select control vertices and move them up, move them down, and reposition and redraw or reshape the curve that you already created. And once you are happy with the shape, go ahead and right click hold and go back to object mode. And now you have reshaped the curve. So now, in order for you to extrude along that curve, you have to have an object, and you have to have faces that you can extrude along the curve. So for this example, I'm going to create a cylinder, and I'll just keep the defaults. And I can go ahead and make the cylinder larger or smaller. That's going to be the shape of our extrusion that's going to follow this curve. So the key is to take the object, select the faces that you want to extrude. So you have to switch over to face component mode. You select the faces first, hold shift, more key drag to select the curve second. press Ctrl E to extrude, or go to Edit Mesh and Extrude. Ctrl E is the shortcut. And then add divisions. When you add divisions, it's going to begin to follow the curve to extrude and create the shape following that curve. However, at the moment there was a problem. Let me undo. And that is because the best way to do this is you have to position the object and its faces a little bit more accurately in order to extrude along this curve. So you saw when you extrude, it's going to take these faces and it kind of angles them down and just extrudes along this curve. So you need to take the object that you are extruding, or the faces that you're extruding, and align them to the curve better. So to do this, you can go ahead and begin to rotate the object, because I want to only extrude these faces on the cap. And you just have to align to the object or to the curve better. So the faces have to be perpendicular to the curve, or they have to follow the curve. So basically you would want to place either the curve or the object. It doesn't really matter. I can actually move the curve to align it better to the faces where they're going to be extruded from. So positioning matters a lot. So let's go ahead and actually modify the curve and place it here. You can use many of the snapping options to make this process a lot easier. So you can see that the pivot point right now is a little off in space in the mold origin. It's not on the curve itself. You can actually snap pivot points to the curve, to its end, by using the regular snapping options that we covered in the course in Maya Foundation. In this case, you would just hold down D to access pivot modification, then hold C, middle mouse click and drag on the curve, and snap it right there at the end. And now I can hold down V, middle mouse click and drag, and it will snap right to that vertex on the cylindrical object. So now my curve is precisely aligned to the faces that I am going to extrude right in the center. And it will just make the job of extrusion a lot easier. Now, let's go ahead and select the faces. They're already selected from the previous selection. Hold Shift, select the curve second. So faces get selected first, always. And then Shift, select the curve second. And then Control E to extrude. You can see that it just now follows that curve perfectly. And then just add divisions. And now we have a perfectly extruded shape of those faces along the curve. It's going to cap at 25 segments for the division. So if you wanted to increase and make that value larger, you just have to input a value. So if I want to type in 40, I can. And in my case, I think 25 is pretty good. Then you go back to object mode, exit, and here's our extruded shape along that curve. And as long as you keep history, you can still modify the curve and reshape the extrusion. So let me switch over to 4 wireframe mode so I can select that curve. Let's go back to 5. And with the curve selected, in empty space, if I right click hold, I can switch over to control vertices and then select those control vertices and just move them up and down, and the extrusion of the faces will update. So I can continue reshaping this and modify it. So if you needed to make adjustments, you can still do that. Now, as soon as you delete history on this, so if I go to delete history, and I try to modify the control vertices, that attachment has now been broken, and you can no longer kind of update. So you keep history on this object for as long as you need, but at a certain point you are going to have to delete history if you're going to attach it to another object, if you're going to export it, and so on. So keep it for as long as you can, for as long as you need, but then you will have to end up deleting history at some point. Let me go ahead and undo until we get our curve and object back before the extrusion. And I want to show you a common error of extruding objects. So you have to position the curve and the faces that you're going to extrude right where the curve began. So when you began to draw the curve, this is where we started right here, and the ending point is at the other end. So this is where you have to position those faces, or position the curve at its beginning point right next to the faces you're going to extrude. If you do it the other way, so for example, let me take this object. In this case, I'm going to take and modify the pivot point to the other side. It doesn't really matter where I'm modifying it, but I want to make this cylinder appear on the other end at the end of the curve. So to do this quickly, I'm just going to take and modify the pivot point here, hold D, then V, middle mouse click and drag so the pivot point snaps to that vertex. And now I'm just going to snap that cylinder by holding down C, middle mouse click and drag on the curve so it snaps. And then I'm simply going to rotate and align it better. So it kind of follows the direction of this, like so. Now, here's what happens a lot of times when you try to extrude on the end of the curve rather than the beginning. So I'm going to select the faces. In this case, I'm going to select all of these faces that I want to extrude. Hold Shift, select the curve second, and then press Ctrl E to extrude and add divisions. And you can see the beginning of extrusion jumps to the beginning of the curve, and then it begins to extrude properly. So that kind of breaks our extrusion. So the rule is you have to position those faces or the curve where you begin to draw the curve. That's where the object has to be extruded from, or the faces. Now there is a quick way to reverse the curve so you don't have to reposition it by selecting the curve, going to curves, and choosing reverse direction. Now, if I select those faces again, Shift select the curve, Ctrl E to extrude, and add divisions. Now I'm extruding from the other end because now we reversed the curve direction and our extrusion is working properly. Now let me go ahead and select the object that we extruded. We still have history on this. So I'm going to hit T for transform or for tool to bring back that menu, that floating box. So if you ever lose that floating box, you deselect it and you select it again. If it doesn't appear for you, just hit T. It'll bring it back as long as you haven't done anything to it. The last menu that you had it floating will open back up. We have a couple of other options we can do here. You can adjust the offset. That may not work sometimes. You can adjust the thickness. Of course, that's not going to really do much. We don't want to do that. You can readjust the divisions, of course. But there's other two options that you may want to take a look at and control. And those are twist and taper. You can twist the extrusion along the curve, as well as you can taper off the end. So it kind of creates a point at the end, look almost like a tentacle. You're not going to get these options here, and you can actually get them in here. I'll show you in a minute. But if you go to the channel box and under inputs under poly extrude, if you open this up, you'll have them available here. Here you have a twist and here you have taper. So you could adjust the values here. So taper, for example, make it larger at the end. So the same thickness is in the front at the beginning, and then you make it thicker as it goes to the other end. Or you can make it smaller, let's say 0.1. And now we're going to create a tentacle. Let's go ahead and set it maybe to 3 at the moment. And then you can also twist it. So basically just twist in the entire direction. So in certain situations you may want to twist. Let's go 25. Kind of hard to tell, but it is twisting, as you can see. Now, in order to get these options in the floating menu, all you have to do is click on this icon right here. It looks like a circle with 3 lines in it. And then you just enable twist and then enable taper. So that way they appear as floating boxes. So you can tweak them here instead of the channel box. A lot of times it's a little simpler. You can extrude faces from an existing object as well. So for a lot of times you will have an object already modeled and you just need to be a set of faces extruded from it. So this entire time I showed you the simple technique by introducing a primitive shape and then extruding faces. However, let's say I have this curve. Let's go ahead and modify the pivot point. D, C, middle mouse click and drag. So it's right there in the, at the vertex in the end. And let's say I have a sphere. And I'm going to make it larger. Just going to position it somewhere. Position it right there maybe. Let's go to the top view really quick. And I'm going to position those faces right there at the top. So let's say you already have an object that you need to extrude faces from. You just simply draw the curve, position the curve where you would want it to extrude from. So in this case, I'm going to take this curve and I'm going to snap them to that vertex at the top. Hold V, middle mouse click. You can see how snapping and modifying pivot points is extremely important. And then you just simply take the object that you have, select the faces that you need to extrude. So let's just take these at the top. Shift select the curve, Control E to extrude. In this case, our beginning of the curve was at that correct position, so we don't need to reverse the curve. And then I'm going to not offset it, but add divisions. And then maybe in this case, let's taper. to a small point. And because I have my history, I'm going to select the curve, right click hold, go to control vertices, find my control vertices, and adjust the curve. Make it a little bit better. More interesting shape, maybe so it's not so angular. Just reposition it like so. And now we have a far more interesting shape extruded from an existing object we already had. Also, let me go ahead and undo and get back before we did the extrusion. Kind of want to show you another option. So we've been kind of selecting a set of faces that have been closed off, but you can actually extrude different set of faces. So for example, I can just select all of these and on the outside and extrude them along this curve, and I will have a hollow point or hollow area within this extrusion. So let's go ahead and Control E to extrude. Let's add divisions, and let's take a look at the end. So now you can see that I've created an interior portion of this. So it's all a matter of which faces that you have selected you want to extrude. Maybe I want to, let's remove a few of these. Maybe I want to only select a few on the corners. So let me select these right here. So let's do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and something like that on this other side. Select the curve, Control E, and now we're extruding only those faces. Let's add divisions, like so. So that right now, based on the curve and the faces we have selected, we have some problems here. But just to give you an idea, you can, you don't have to have a closed off set of faces selected. It's all a matter of which parts of the geometry that you need to extrude, which faces, and then you just extrude only those faces. So that should give you some ideas of maybe extruding panels, hollow shapes, trims and borders, and so on. Another interesting thing you can do is you can take your polygonal object, select edges, and then convert those edges to create a curve that then you can extrude along. So for example, it's a very neat trick. Let me go ahead and duplicate this. Let's raise it up. So I'm going to, let's say, select this set of edges around this mesh. And you can do an entire ring of edges, or you can do select a set of edges. It's up to you how you want that curve to be created. And with that curve selected, if you go to Modify, Convert, and let me make this into a floating window as well. And then here you have an option to convert polygonal edges to curve. So I'm going to select this. Now we have a curve. And we still have our object. Now the curve is kind of attached to that object, but here's our curve that we converted from edges to a curve. Now in this case, this curve is actually closed off, so let me undo this. And let's say I only want just a selected set of edges, not the entire edge ring. So let me maybe just go from here and maybe halfway point, something like that. And let's convert selected edges to a curve. And now we have a curve that's been taken from the object, and now it's aligned perfectly to the object. I can modify the points on it. This is now a curve. So instead of drawing the curve, we converted edge to a curve, or set of edges to a curve. And in this case, maybe I could introduce a cylinder or some other object. In this case, let's do a cylinder. And I'm gonna just quickly snap it right here so I can modify it. So I'm gonna hold down V, middle mouse click and drag so it snaps to next to our object. And then let's rotate this. Maybe make it smaller. And I'm just gonna position it right there. And now we can use the same techniques we've done. Select a set of faces. In this case, let's just select half of this. Shift select the curve that we just converted. Control E to extrude. Add divisions. And looks like it's going to the other end because we would need to reverse the curve. So in this case, let me quickly reverse it because it looks like it's jumping on the other side and this was the end. Let's go to curves, reverse direction. Reselect the faces, shift select the curve. Let me try it again. Make sure I'm selecting the curve. Right there. Control E to extrude, add divisions. And now we kind of created additional detail on top of the object using their curve. And something like this would be a lot more difficult to do if you did not know how. But being able to convert edges to your curve and then use that curve to extrude something else is very, very helpful. And another thing is if you create, let's say you have an object and you want to create a curve, but you want to snap that curve to an existing object instead of having to draw it in empty space and then try to maybe position it around your object. So I can enable the EP curve. Let me close this off. Enable to draw the EP curve. And then if you hold down C or V, in this case, I'm going to hold down V because it's going to start snapping to vertices. And I can left click and you can see that my point is snapping to vertices. And I can continue to hold down V and start snapping my curve on the surface of the object, on the vertices of the object that I am drawing this curve on. And then I can go ahead and hit enter. Here's my curve. And then I can do something with this curve. Whether I redraw it or reshape it somehow, and then maybe I can extrude that part of it. Something like this. So let's just see what we can do. So I'm just gonna drag these out. And then let's take the control points here at the top and just maybe move them. And let's say I want to take this face right here and then extrude along this new curve. Let's do Control E, add divisions. And here we have extruded part of the mesh. So snapping those curves to an existing object can be very helpful as well. Again, all depends what you're trying to extrude and what kind of shape you're trying to get from this technique. Let me go ahead and undo so we get that curve back. And also sometimes you need to get a center point on a face. So you want to maybe put or snap a curve exactly in the center of a face. So in this case right here we have cubes. And let's say I want to extrude this specific face right here, but I want to be a little bit more precise. So I can take this curve and I won't be able to snap to the center of the space because I don't see one. So there's a quick trick you can do. First, let me go ahead and snap that pivot point to the beginning end right here on the corner. So I'm going to hold down D, C, middle mouse click and drag. So now we have our pivot point on the curve, and now I want to snap it. So I don't want to snap it right there in the corner. Well, I can just simply hold down V, middle mouse click and drag and snap it right there. But what if I want to actually just snap it to this center of the face? But we don't have a center. So I can select this face and temporarily create a center so I can snap things to, and I can delete those edges. And it's a nice little trick by taking that face and you can poke it by going to Edit Mesh and Poke. This will introduce a vertice in the center. Then you can take that curve or whatever object that you're trying to snap things to, hold V, middle mouse click and drag, snap to that, and then you can go ahead and delete these. Control delete those edges. And now you have a face. You have a curve right in the center, and then you can go ahead and extrude a lot more precisely right from the center. And then maybe let's go and add a taper to it. So here are the techniques of extruding along a curve. Few secrets, few things that most people don't share or I haven't seen being shared that often. An extremely useful technique for you to begin using to model with. Now, this is just one of more than 20 different techniques, modeling techniques that I show in Maya Foundation, the Homesteader course. If you are serious about modeling environment art, props, assets, modular buildings, or even characters, and you need to learn Maya from scratch without any previous 3D knowledge of modeling or UVing, then I recommend that you download Maya Foundation, the Homesteader course. It's the only course you need to begin learning Maya, both modeling and UVing completely from scratch. There's a link in the description box, or if you are on the website on worldofleveldesign.com watching it there, there'll be a link on the same page for you to download it.